Hi, we are going to read today a short book about the Liberty Bell. The Liberty Bell is one of our symbols of freedom, and we're going to find out how it became one of our symbols of freedom. Here's a nice close-up picture of the Liberty Bell. All right, let's find out more about the Liberty Bell. Think about what you might know already about it. What do you know about the Liberty Bell? And let's see if we can find out some more. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania was a busy city in the 1750s. What were the sounds in this city? Look at this picture. Let's think about the sounds you might hear in the city. I see horses. Have you heard horses running before? People working, people talking. Probably a pretty noisy place. Horses clomped, people talked in little brick shops, and a big clanging bell rang in the State House. So there was a bell all the way up in there. Words on the bell read, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land." Liberty is another word for freedom. And so here's a nice picture of that bell proclaiming liberty or freedom. This bell is a symbol that stands for liberty. It's called the Liberty Bell. In 1752, the bell had just come on a ship from England. On the very first ring, it cracked. So here's a picture of it. Remember, it's just a symbol of our freedom, and you can see right there's a crack. And it happened on the very first ring. But it came all the way over from England. John Pass and John Stowe fixed the cracked bell. They melted it down to liquid metal. They added some copper to make it stronger. Pass and Stowe poured the metal into a mold. They cast a new bell. It was big, clanging, bonging bell. So here they are. Pass and Stowe are working on fixing that bell with the crack. And then here it is. Ben Franklin was one of Philadelphia's leaders. He listened to all the clanging, clomping, and talking. What sound did he like best? What do you think? Well, Ben said, the sweetest of all sounds is liberty. But how can you hear liberty? So here's a picture of the city, and then a picture of Ben Franklin, and a quote, "The sweetest sound is the sound of liberty or freedom." Ben heard liberty in the sounds of people praying. In Pennsylvania, people were free to pray their own way. Most people in Pennsylvania had come from other countries, and these countries, kings told the people how to pray. But here, with freedom, they were able to pray the way they wanted to, not because a king was telling them to. Ben also heard liberty at meetings in the State House. People were free to say what they thought. In some countries, people went to jail if the king did not like what they said. So people in this country, people are free to say what they think. England ruled America in the 1750s. The Liberty Bell rang when there was news from England. People gathered to hear new laws that England made. Americans did not like England's laws. They wanted to be free to make their own laws. So it was a message. The bell was clanging. They knew there was news from England. And not always good news, because they did not want the king making rules for them. Ben Franklin went to talk to England's leaders. The Liberty Bell rang out to wish him well. But Ben could not make England's leaders understand. People in America grew angry. So if you've listened to our Ben Franklin book, it talks about how he went to England to try to tell them people want to be free. They don't want to follow the king's rules. They don't want to follow those laws set by England. And people were upset. Well, they decided to go to war for their freedom. In 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. It declared that America was free from England. America was independent. Not relying on another country, not being told what to do by another country, but free to make their own laws. The Liberty Bell called out the news on July 8, 1776. It proclaimed liberty throughout all the land. Huzzah! Huzzah! People cheered. God bless the free states of America. The Liberty Bell rang out to proclaim that freedom. 70 years later, the Liberty Bell was still ringing. It rang for George Washington's birthday. Then a small crack grew into a big one. The Liberty Bell could not ring again. They fixed that crack, they put copper in it, they made it stronger, but many years later, that crack came back. And it couldn't, because it grew, it couldn't be rung again or it would break. Still, the Liberty Bell is important to Americans. People come to Philadelphia to see and touch this bell. So if you're in Philadelphia or you're traveling there, go see the Liberty Bell. Well, now the old bell is a silent symbol. It is a symbol of liberty, the sweetest sound of all. It's silent now, but it still stands for that liberty. And it's so neat to think that it was there at the founding of our country, ringing out, proclaiming Liberty Bell. So here are some facts about the Liberty Bell. Pennsylvania is spelled Pennsylvania on the Liberty Bell. It is an old spelling that is no longer used. So Pennsylvania has 2 N's, but on the Liberty Bell it only has 1 N. The Pass and Stow bell was hung in the State House in 1753, but people did not like the sound of the bell, so Pass and Stow cast a second bell. This is the Liberty Bell that we know today. In 1772, people living near the State House complained to Pennsylvania's leaders. They were upset about the too frequent ringing by the great bell in the steeple. British soldiers melted bells that they captured during the war. They used the metal for musket shot and cannonballs. Americans removed the Liberty Bell before the British entered Philadelphia in 1777. The bell was hidden under the floor of a church in Allentown, Pennsylvania. They did not want the British to melt it down. It was one of our important symbols. The Liberty Bell no longer hangs in the State House. It's on display in a glass building nearby. The Liberty Bell has not spent all its time in Pennsylvania. Between 1885 and 1915, it traveled 25,000 miles around the country. It visited almost 400 cities in 7 different trips. Cheering crowds gathered the Liberty Bell with flags, flowers, and parades. In 1885, it went to New Orleans, Louisiana. In 1893, to Chicago, Illinois. 1895, to Atlanta, Georgia. 1902, to Charleston, South Carolina. 1903, to Boston, Massachusetts. 1915, to San Francisco, California. There are no more trips planned for the Liberty Bell. Moving the old bell could damage it. But each year, 1.5 million people visit the bell in its Philadelphia home. So again, if you're in Philadelphia or nearby, or you travel to Philadelphia for a visit, go visit the Liberty Bell. And then this book has some more resources and information about the Liberty Bell. One of our very important American symbols. The Liberty Bell, the sound of freedom is the sweetest sound, Ben Franklin says, and I agree with him. All right, have fun reading more books. Remember, I go to my library. That's why this code is here. Go to the library, check out more books, and have fun reading, learning about our history.